Welcome to the Permanent Problem Podcast. I'm your host, Levin and Lindsey, a Senior Vice President at the Niskanen Center. Each episode, we take a deep dive into the messy and uncertain transition from mass affluence to mass flourishing, exploring what I call capitalism's triple crisis and the potential for rising above it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Permanent Problem Podcast. I'm really excited about today's episode because it represents a new direction for the podcast. Thus far, all the podcasts I've done so far, I've had guests on that have helped me analyze and figure out what's going wrong with the world. And that's a big subject with a lot of different angles. And it's an important subject. I don't think we can get going in the right direction unless we figure out what wrong turns we have made. But spending all your time on the world's troubles is a bummer. And then ultimately the reason to figure out the world's troubles is to make them better. So I'm happy today to pivot towards thinking about how to actually move things in the right direction and talk with someone who's doing that. If you're familiar at all with my work on the Substack and my book, The Permanent Problem, you know that I argue that the kind of 21st century melees that the rich advanced democracies are in is due to the fact that we're in a kind of no man's land between achieving material mass affluence and translating that into sort of spiritual mass flourishing. And I argue that one of the most important priorities for getting from here to there, moving towards a world more amenable and conducive to mass flourishing, is to revitalize our face-to-face communities. We've had a real sort of contagion of disconnection and social disintegration over the 21st century, and we need to be moving in the opposite direction, reknitting those frayed ties and reconnecting with people, because that's ultimately the foundation for well-being for Homo sapiens. We're a hypersocial species and we need other people. So I'm delighted today to have as my guest Phil Levin, who has devoted his career towards revitalizing face-to-face communities, one family and set of friends at a time. He is the co-founder of Live Near Friends, which we'll talk about more, a founding member of Culdesac, which is a set of co-living communities, and also on top of that helps to run the Substack Super Nuclear. So Phil Levin, wonderful to have you on the show.
Yeah, great to be here.
So tell me, first of all, your story. What were you on another career track before you made this pivot, and then tell the pivot of how you got interested in housing and making housing something beyond single family housing, which has become the utterly dominant norm in American life.
Yeah. So I was on a totally different career track. I was working in the developing world, trying to get people mobile banking on their phone. So back around 2010, let's say, you had roughly, everyone at that point had a mobile phone, but only about 20% of people had bank accounts. And so the idea was you could use the mobile phone as a way to get people financial services. And so that was sort of my first career. I was living in a bunch of different countries. And actually, when you live in a bunch of different countries, you actually really feel like you're in community, because you quickly find the expats.
Yes.
And the expat community becomes your community, and they take care of each other, right? Because no one has family there, so I sort of came back to the U.S. at that point and actually felt the absence of community. Felt like I didn't really have anyone. I was like this anonymous person in the big city of San Francisco. But then I met my wife.
And had you grown up? In a tighter knit community or a big family, or does this not come out of your own biography?
Yeah, I grew up in sort of the traditional American suburbs in a very loving family, a nice neighborhood, but nothing out of the norm.
Okay.
But the real sort of turning point for me and really the change in my career is I met my wife, Kristen. She's a professional behavioral scientist, so studies what makes people happy and healthy. And we like to experiment in our own lives. And so when we were having the conversation, how do we want to live? I thought we would do, quote, the normal thing, which was go get a 1-bedroom apartment by ourselves,
Right.
and just live the two of us somewhere. And she said, I've read all the research. Absolutely not. That is not going to make us happy. And what we did instead was we rented a 9 bedroom mansion in San Francisco and moved in 9 of our friends. And so that was our move in together moment as a couple.
How long did
Um,
you assemble the original that nine?
Sorry, say again.
How long did it take to assemble the nine participants?
Ooh, a few months. A few
Right.
months. Yeah,
Huh.
we were on a sales tour.
Yeah.
Luckily, people in San Francisco are fairly open to ideas like this. It's a good place to experiment here. Um, so we started moving together. I'm like, okay, we'll do this as an experiment, and it ended up becoming my career. um, and surprisingly, at that point, I sort of got interested in real estate and housing, and asking the question like, why is it our housing is not helping more with our happiness, our sense of belonging, our health? It just seems like our housing is working against us. And so I ended up meeting two guys, Jeff and Ryan, who were starting a company called Culdesac. And Culdesac was sort of set out to build car-free neighborhoods in the U.S.
Right.
And we ended up building this car-free neighborhood. They got a lot of press, a lot of attention in Tempe, Arizona. It is open now. People are living there. But people thought it was
I'll just,
crazy to build a car-free neighborhood. Yeah.
I'll just mention quickly that this is the first time you and I have chatted, but we did email a couple of years ago because I was going to be in Phoenix and wanted to check out Culdesac, and you helped line me up with the people there. So
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Um, and the yeah, so I was sort of about entree into housing, and then I my wife and I ended up then starting a second community for ourselves again, called Radish in Oakland. And we sort of thought of this as like, oh,
this was because really first place, or because there were problems with the first place.
because people were starting to talk about having kids.
Okay.
And living in that big mansion in San Francisco is not the right setup for kids. And so we were sort of saying like, hey, let's take the parts we like about this, which is like living in community with friends, and try to translate this into a new sort of era in our lives. And so we bought this property in Oakland, which had a bunch of space, and we now live there with 20 friends, 10 kids, all who were born there under the age of 5, and spread across 10 private homes. And so most people
And
have their own like private unit.
let's walk from the farthest one to the other. How far away?
A 40-second walk. So they're,
Okay.
they're all they're all tight cluster.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's like you don't have to put on shoes. And so we end up sort of starting this community, and we sort of thought about this as just like, you know, we're sort of unique people. We want to live in a unique way. We're gonna like set up this like one time experiment in this thing. And what ended up happening to our great surprise was there was just we sort of discovered along the way there's this fairly universal interest in this. And we started getting emails and calls and people like, I want to do this. How do I do this? Can you help me? And we sort of realized that actually there's a lot of people who want to live this way. There's just no way for them to do it. There's no
Right.
offerings out there. Our built environment's just not set up for it. It's not on the menu for people. And so that motivated me to start this company, Live Near Friends, which is sort of trying to take the way we live at Radish, and make it available to a lot more people.
And tell me what does Live Near Friends do? How does it work? How does it help people? And what's the scale of it?
Yeah. So the mission as a company is help people live in close proximity to the people they care most about, friends and family. And what we do practically is we help people purchase and also develop, build from scratch, housing where you can live next door to friends and family. And so on the purchase side, what might this look like is like, two sisters who want to buy a duplex together,
Right.
and we will help them find it, figure out the financing, figure out the legal structure. And then on the developing side, which is really what I'm interested in, I'm a housing developer, is we're helping people actually build from scratch,
Right.
housing that is specifically designed for neighbors that know each other and want to be in a relationship rather than neighbors that want to be strangers. And I talk more about what that actually looks like, I'm sure, later.
And right now, what's the split in your clientele between the kind of off the shelfers and the people who want to build their own place?
Yeah. I'd say probably 2/3 off the shelf, 1/3 want to go build in. It
Yeah.
takes a very specific personality who want to do that. It's a big project.
Yeah.
But it's more than you might think. I mean, it's like not that many people build their own home, but about
Right.
a third of my clientele is interested in that, which is, I'd actually think is an indication that the real estate industry is maybe like a little too. We're just going to hand you the product as opposed to actually having people participate in the process.
Um, so your radish, the second of your co-living arrangements. You're in the process of selling that now, aren't you? So you have a third act in mind, right?
Yes, that's right. So yeah, we sort of built Radish for what we call the shoulder years. So it's like the few years before people start having kids, to like up to age maybe 5, when there's like a sort of set of needs you have, right? You don't need like a ton of space for kids to run around. They're not that old yet. But you still sort of want to be connected to the city and connected to like restaurants and bars.
Right.
And the third act is sort of going like full suburban, like like our parents did. And I can't believe I'm here, but I got here. And so we're building actually 3 new communities that are basically being 3 new spin-offs of Radish, and everyone who lives in Radish is going to move into one of those 3. And these typically are just places with bigger units, a little more space, a little more focus on schools, sort of all the reasons people tend to move to the suburbs.
Right. So with Radish, you told me the number of people and families in the compound, but my understanding is you had other people just kind of move into the vicinity as well to get in on the fun.
That's right. And this was unexpected. So, Radish is like where we live. What we didn't expect is it sort of turned into like a third space for the wider neighborhood. In some ways, it's like it
Yeah.
is like
You're the
there's just
community
like a
center.
cluster of people,
Yeah.
community center.
Yeah.
And so we had actually a bunch of other friends. We basically ran out of space really quickly at Radish. We just have only so many units, and people who wanted to participate would end up buying or renting nearby. So we had 8 friends who bought homes near us within walking distance, and they sort of use it as their like third space. And what we sort of learned, which is interesting, is I think there's like proximity really matters, and we sort of have this like natural experiment of seeing people move next door versus a 5 minute walk away versus a 10 minute walk away versus a 15 minute walk away, and there's huge differences at those like distance scales, in terms
Yes.
of how they participate, right? So it's like the distance that I think is most relevant, we like to call Crocs distance, which is like the distance you'd be willing to just throw on Crocs and walk on over, and not
Okay.
have to like call up and say, "Are you there?" But to actually just like walk on over to have a look and see who's around. Um, there's another distance that we call baby monitor distance, which is even closer, which is
Right.
when you leave your kid in your house, bring your baby monitor and come hang out and feel okay that your kid is in the house. Um, it's within the range of the baby monitor essentially. And we found that like there's enormous differences in the utility of being baby monitor distance than Crocs distance versus like I actually have to make an event of coming over.
And so when does I mean if you're a 5 minute walk away, are you is that croc distance or is that more of an effort? Do you really have to
Call
just
it
be kind
Crocs
of next?
distance.
What's
I call
that?
it Crocs
Uh,
distance. I call it
okay,
Crocs
okay.
distance. You can finish the meeting, walk over, walk back.
But basically, if you have to get in the car, it's over, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you might as well be on the other side of the city if you need to get in a car.
Okay. Let's talk a little about terminology. I think you use co-living most often, but there's co-housing, there's compounds, there's co-ops, and then as we get into the fringier vibes, you get communes and intentional
Yeah, yeah.
communities. So and yeah, what? Tell me your terminological choice and the thinking behind it.
Yeah. So I actually don't use any of those terms. Now
Okay.
the term I use is just living your friends and family. And
Okay.
and
That's
there's a
most.
reason for that. I think all the terms you mentioned are sort of they come loaded, like with some
Yep.
like mental image of who is doing this. So if you think of the commune, like there's a thing in your head right now when you think the word commune. We think when and I think our mission as a company is we want to make this a sort of like universal thing on the menu. We want to make it for normies. We want to make it for just like your average people. And so we're sort of trying to use terminology that I think is just sort of universal and doesn't come loaded with some idea of like some specific person that is doing it.
So I will say that when I was cooking up the ideas that led to the Substack in the book, I was much clearer on what was going wrong than what to do about it, and the ideas about what to do about it, which were novel to me, and they weren't the kinds of things that I'd been thinking about before. They didn't grow out of seeing some reform movement on the ground and saying, "Ooh, wow, that looks promising." They just grew out of thinking, "Okay, what's wrong?" and then how do we undo that? So so that led me towards thinking we really need much more face-to-face connection. That in particular, the reason we're disconnecting from people is that once upon a time, when the world was poor, uh, other people, your face-to-face relationships played, vital. They had vital practical roles in your life, right? Your spouse was your helpmeet in economic production. Your kids worked on the farm and took care of you when you were older. Your neighbors were help against danger and an insurance policy against bad times, and the only alternative to listening to the crickets for doing something to unwind. So and as we've gotten richer, a lot of those functions we've outsourced to the market or to the welfare state. And so our face-to-face relationships have just become kind of one consumption option amidst a sea of expertly marketed alternatives, and the marketing seems to win more often than not. So, I had this sense that we're being led away from our better selves and our longer term interests by kind of short term dopamine hits, and we need something that will institutionalize reconnecting with each other. And when I first started to share these ideas with people, that I would just get eye rolls and like, "Oh, so you want everybody to go back and live on a commune again?" No, no, that's not what I want. So when I finally discovered that there were real people who weren't communards, who were just regular folks who thought, "Wow, it'd be nice to live with not next to strangers, but next to people that matter to me." Anyway, that was just like a huge pick me up. That wow, there's things going out in the world that are connecting with what I'm up to. So yeah, the two models I think we have for group living are the '60s commune or the college frat house, right? And
Those are the two.
yeah, and neither of those is really what you want to pitch to just Joe and Jane American.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I think actually you've actually said this the very similar way to I describe it. I think really I think the question we're trying to answer is like who is your support structure as a person in this world? And I think maybe on like one side of the aisle the answer would be it's the market or it's the individual. You are your own support structure, and the other side it might be the government's your support structure. And I sort of don't believe in either of those.
Yeah.
Like for me, like the natural support structure is like your local community. It's like the people around you in close proximity to you, your friends, your family, your neighbors. And like it seems that we just like hollowed out that sort of mid or level organism. Like
Yeah.
the organism, the individual is very well understood. The government's very well understood.
Yeah, civil society, all those intermediate institutions between the individual and the state, it's hollowed out a lot.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, and I think the work I do, it's like it's one sort of vector of response to that problem. I think there's probably many, and I hope you probably have them on your show. But for me, it starts like the I think your support structure really needs to be local. Like, is so many of your physical needs are like local needs.
Right.
It's like who's gonna drive you to the hospital when you have an emergency? Who's gonna come over and watch your kid? It's like I think there's a natural like sort of geography of support, and for me, it starts with housing because that's what really sets up the ability for that to happen.
So, why is this happening now? Why are you happening now? Why are people like you happening now? Why did your Culdesac co-founders come along now? So we had in the '60s we had a very different dynamic, right? It was a cultural break from young people wanting to break from the kind of conformism and the perceived cookie cutter oppressiveness of bourgeois life and get back to the land and get back to authentic. So it was a real kind of revolutionary attempt to break beyond consumerism into a radically different kind of lifestyle, and a kind of a throwback back to the land lifestyle. And that turned out to just not work, right? It's a subsistence farming is hard, brutal work, and there's a reason everybody left the farm as soon as they could, and so that ran out of gas. We've had, in big cities for a while now, it's pretty common for young professionals to deal with high rents and low starting salaries by having roommates and having kind of group homes, and that's a pretty common thing. Probably more common in the Bay Area than maybe anywhere else because of the insane housing prices, and also just the kind of hacker culture group house thing. Just seems there's a cultural vibe that supports group living. At any rate, but when you started doing your idiosyncratic, weird, pioneering kind of lifestyle experimentation, you immediately started having people, wow, I want to do that. So you immediately started sensing this kind of latent demand. Where is that coming from? Why is it showing up now and not before?
Yeah, good question. So I think there's a couple factors, and you've already been on a few of them. So one is like housing is broken. Everyone sort of understands housing is not working, and you see this most clearly with prices. But I think it's a more general feeling, and so like no one thinks like this is going well. They're open to other ideas. The second, like I said, is more people are roommates. I think related to the housing costs, and so the idea that you would have other people, and like when my wife and I started dating, we were living with roommates. And some of our feeling is like we don't want to give up our roommates. We like living with them. um, and the third I think is which I think will continue to reverberate is the pandemic. So the pandemic was sort of this like once in a like century moment when everyone simultaneously asked themselves the question, um, how do I want to live in a new world?
Yeah.
And it was this moment when people were actually just open to other ways of life. I worked on a company that was trying to actually, do van life stuff and get people to like form communities around vans. Didn't work, but it was like people were open to ideas like that in the pandemic. And I think it sort of just scrambled everyone's like sort of like default path, like mindless, like, oh, I'm gonna get this home next and this home next, and just left people open to other ideas.
Uh, it also uh, it also promoted a huge step increase in remote work, working from home. So during the pandemic, in particular, right, like 40% of work hours were in the home for a while in 2020, and then people expected it all to pop back, just boom, and it didn't because people liked it. People liked cutting that hour and a half, 2 hours out of their commuting time out of their life. People liked being able to go deal with a kid's doctor's appointment, in the middle of the day without trauma. So there's been enormous amount of resistance. So you had this big managers wanted everybody back under their control and under their their watchful eyes, and people wanted to stay home. A lot of them did. So there's been a durable increase in
Yeah,
remote work as part of it, which was accelerating a long-term secular change. So from the first factories until like 1980, the entire trend was the other way. It was work moving out of the home and into factories, and then moving into shops and offices. So before that, everybody was a farmer. They worked at home. The home was a site of economic production. It evolved over time where the home, like the only production you do there is cooking and home maintenance, and it's just a site of consumption, and everything moved out of the house into offices and factories. But starting around, and so by 1980 in America, we hit the nadir. Only 2% of people reported the home as their primary workplace. But now it's up over 20%. And there was a big jump in COVID, but it's been gradual since 1980s. It's all basically online, either facilitating remote work for employers or facilitating doing online internet businesses. So that struck me as a huge structural change in the way the economy is working that opens up possibilities for people to live near family and friends. It divorces the living decision from the work, from where you work. Uh, and so, how important is that with your clients? Are you seeing that most of them are remote workers, or how does that work?
Yes, 100%. I think you hit the nail on the head here. It's like the starting point for the housing decision used to be, where's my workplace
Right.
and how do I commute to it? Now people need a new starting point, and what's that going to be? And the claim I want to put forward is you should start with the who. You should start with your support network. You should start with the people that you love and admire, and that should be the starting point for your housing decision. If you're fortunate enough to be able to be divorced from your place of work,
Yep.
which not everyone is yet, but many people are. And so there's
Yeah.
a lot of people we live with are. We happen to be easily commutable to downtown San Francisco, so we don't really have to give that up where we are. But I think more and more you might actually see communities like this that actually are not in reference to sort of where the office cluster is.
It seems like once you have that population of people who truly are footloose and fancy free in their housing decisions, um, that could start bleeding out into the people who are actually still going to work in an office to think, hey, maybe I've got more flexibility about this than I thought. You've got plenty of different location options. To get, if your workplace is in location X, there's a bunch of different possibilities for where your residence could be. So if you start out thinking about how to coordinate, with family and friends, then it makes it easier. But if they've got two different workplaces and people are changing jobs, then that really is a significant barrier. It seems to me that the biggest friend you have as far as pushing this trend forward is the trend towards being able to work wherever you want to.
Yeah. And I think, actually, one of the things we were really thinking about when we started Culdesac is, I think the other secular trend you're going to see is how changes in mobility are going to change people's behavior, of where they are able to live. And so I think the self driving car and possibly eVTOLs
Yeah.
are going to be big here. Sort of messing with all this, right? And so like the idea that you can like sit in a self driving car with a great suspension system, driving very smoothly, doing your work as you go to work. Right now people's commute fringe, for the typical person, it's about 30 minutes and it goes up to an hour for other people.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to see that commute fringe being pushed out quite a bit in a world with self driving cars and other
Yeah.
technologies. And so you might actually, and I think that's kind of a sprawling effect, which actually could also influence the types of housing that people start choosing.
No, that's an excellent point, and I hadn't really focused on that, but for sure, once the commute isn't lost time where you got to be, staring at the road, you can be doing anything. Then the commute is less awful than it was before, and is a less of a constraint on where you want to live than it was before. So that
Did
is
you feel this Marchetti's law? Have you heard this before?
no, I have not.
It's a fascinating rabbit hole. So there's a physicist named Marchetti, I think in the 70s maybe, was studying basically how long people are willing to commute throughout history,
Okay.
going back to like the Roman times. And
Yeah.
and he coined this thing called Marchetti's law, which basically said that the time that people are willing to spend commuting is invariant. So the median person will always commute about 30 minutes. But what changes is the technology that transports you. And so
Yes.
as you get basically faster transportation technology, cities grow because
Right.
people's commute tolerance allows them to get further places. And so like you could basically measure the size of cities and back into what is the dominant transportation technology that creates that city. And so like a train scale city will have a certain size, a car scale city will have a certain size. Anyways, a bit of a side tangent, but I think Marchetti's law is important to understanding basically what self-driving cars will do to
Okay. Good.
you to how we live. Yeah.
Good. So you've got another law that you cite sometimes in describing the importance of what you do. It's the law of proximity. So explain that.
Yeah. The the law, how should I just say it? Uh the law of proximity, and this is really what behavioral science would tell you is
Yes.
that the things that are closest to you, lowest friction to you, are going to be the things you do, and the things furthest away from you are going to be the things you don't do. And so the things within a 5 or 10 minute proximity of
Which sounds
you are
like
going to
banal, but it's got a lot of teeth, doesn't it? And people don't face up to it at all.
it does. If you live next to a gym, you'll work out more. If you live next to a pizza place, you'll get fat. Um, And I think people tend to overrate, the amenities in a city, and they tend to underrate the things within a 5 or 10 minute walk of where they live, which I think to a much greater degree determine how you live.
Um, what are what can you tell me about the trends in terms of this kind of group focused living? People, you know, buying and building homes together rather than just as single family units. What do you know
Yeah.
about trends in the United States?
So I think what's been interesting at Living Your Friends is observing the kinds of audiences that show up wanting this. And there's been some surprises on my end, right? So the audience that we knew would show up, who have shown up, are people that are actually a little like me. And the problem that they're trying to solve is there's two working parents in a very expensive city, and we want to have kids. And how on earth do we do this? It seemed
Right.
impossible. And so what they're looking for is they are looking for support in raising kids, and that's the thing they are trying to solve by living near their friends and family.
Yeah.
And the friends thing is important because not everyone has family that can move near them. And so that is for sure a chunk of audience, and we see that a lot. There's two other audiences that I think are fairly interesting. So one is empty nesters,
Okay.
and there's a specific kind of empty nester, and it's largely women and largely single women. Um, and I was sort of curious because, like, these people started showing up to us, and like, we're not marketing to them. We have like millennial marketing. It's like it's like clearly like targeted at people like me. But
Yeah.
we kept getting these like older single women showing up, and I talked to a bunch of them, and I learned a couple things. So the first is that um, I didn't realize how many women above the age of 60 are single. It's over half of women over the age of 60 are single. And so, like, men die younger. When there's divorce, men tend to marry younger. The women tend to not
Yeah.
remarry on average.
Yeah.
And that population appears to not like their housing options. And they want something that is, they don't actually want to live independently, right? They
I,
they want to be in connection with people. They want to live interdependently, as someone wants something. And so that's sort of second audience. There's a third audience, which is uh, child free adults.
okay.
Um, and I had no idea. It turns out 20% of adults in the US are child free, by
Yeah.
choice.
And it's going.
And
Yep.
people don't think about them as a segment. It's a large segment of people. And it turns out actually, on average, they're higher income. They are not trying to, save up money to give their kids an inheritance. They don't have kids.
Right.
So they spend down their money before they die. They try to die with zero.
Right.
And so they actually sort of are higher consumption housing spenders. And they rent, they don't buy.
Yes.
And so it's actually an interesting segment of people to sort of think about housing offerings too. And I don't think anyone's really thinking about them.
So when you have kids, you have a built-in social life of a kind, right? With your kids, it's intensive and demanding, and tends to squash the social life you used to have outside of the one with your kids. But if you're in kid-free adulthood, then yeah, that's a big space that opens up, right? That otherwise gets consumed. Uh, so the kind of the emptiness of solitary living, I would guess, just stares at you in the face more if you've not been going through the hectic years of child rearing.
Yep. And I think kids also helps the social circle. I think the classic thing of like you meet the parents of your
Right.
of your kids' friends. And yeah, so I think there's a social need in that segment. I think's really really sharp.
And so, when did you start Culdesac? When did you start uh, Living Your Friends?
Culdesac was 2018. Living Your Friends was 2023.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, so we've been at it for a few years.
So how do you assess how you're doing, and what does success look like?
Yeah. So I think with both of these, you know, both of these companies are trying to create a new category of housing.
Right.
And I think in the United States, like, we see so much innovation, category innovation in like different industries. Or like, electronics. It's like, think about the number of different electronics products they get released every year. And some work and
Yeah.
some don't work, but like, and housing is just so stale.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and and I think we sort of learned why. It's like it's really hard to create new categories of housing. Um, you pay what somebody called the new concept penalty whenever you try to start something new in the housing space, which is like the insurance companies, the banks, the equity providers, the regulators. Like you need to do extra work with each of them in order to make your product exist. Whereas if you're building the same thing that's been built before, they'll just like, roll out the red carpet and be like, oh yeah, let's get more of that. We understand that. We know how to like make that happen. And so it's just like the uphill battle you face when you start a new category of housing is really sharp. And that's before you even get to like the consumer side of it, where like, people I think are fairly conservative about their housing decisions, especially when they're buying, because it's such a long
Right.
term investment. And so, we haven't seen enough innovation and experimentation in housing. I think it's a huge friction on our civilization that we can't do more of it. So I've always been interested in this because I think it's just really important. And so like both Culdesac and Live Their Friends are basically category innovations in housing. And I think what we've proven with both of them is that the demand is there, right? So it's like we have not had problems getting people interested in living. The problem is more on the supply side. It's how do you actually create it?
Yeah, you can see the stagnation of the housing sector in the numbers, and it's astonishing, arresting numbers of decades of negative productivity growth in both residential and commercial construction. So that's just that's just like absolutely incredibly exotically inexplicably weird, right? We don't have that
Yeah.
that's not the way capitalist economies work, right? They have positive productivity growth over time. That's the whole ball game. So there's just deep, kind of conservative forces that have things stuck in particular ruts that don't seem to be serving us very well. So you face a fair amount of resistance then in busting out of those ruts. So tell me specifically about what legal barriers can crop up if you're wanting to live with family and
Yeah.
friends.
So I think you need specifically family and friends. So I think the good news is that the main barrier is starting to fall. And so the main barrier, if you want to live next to family and friends, is just that in on most lots in the United States, you cannot build multiple homes.
Right.
So that's the basic prerequisite for this. Can you build multiple homes on a single lot? Um, the good news is that is changing. So like a dozen or so states have passed what are called missing middle housing laws. That essentially what they do is you can take a lot of single family lots and turn them into multifamily. And so, for example, my wife and I right now are building basically our third chapter after Radish. And what we were doing is we took a large single family zone lot in the Bay Area where we have two homes on it already, and we're going to subdivide and create four new micro lots and build four new homes, and then we're going to sell our friends those four homes.
So, and
And
how large is the total property?
it's a fairly unique one. So it's about 24,000 square feet. It's a big one
Okay.
for the Bay Area.
Okay.
But you can do this on a 6,000 square foot lot and build maybe three or four homes. Um, and so what's crucial about this is that when you do these subdivisions and you end up with these micro lots with individual homes on them, at that point, those are just single family homes on what are called fee simple lots, which
Right.
means that they can just be financed with all the normal, like, rocket mortgage loans that like just normal people get when they buy a home. So there's nothing exotic needed. You're just buying a single family home. It just happens to be a single family home that you created next to your single family home.
Right.
And so I think these like the ability to do these like small lot subdivisions, I think is really gonna be the thing that it's the reason we started this company now. It unlocks, I think, the ability to like create these things in a methodical, scalable way in a lot of different parts in the United States. Whereas when we had to create Radish, we spent 2 years looking for a property we could do Radish on because they needed to have the right zoning, the right set of buildings, and like
Right.
it took years for us to find it. Now, when we work with clients, we can send them, a dozen options that work for them today.
Um, what's going on outside of the United States? I've read about in Germany there's this thing called Baugruppen, building groups, where it's pretty common apparently for groups of people, friends or family members or whatever, to there's an established process where they get together with a builder, and they build according to their specs, and so there's already this separate category has somehow or another gotten into existence there, so that it's not, you're not just completely innovating a totally new way of doing housing. This idea of a group of people getting together and designing their own space with a builder, and in so doing, apparently achieving some not insignificant savings, is attractive to people. So it seems to be, the lines are going up for that kind of housing decision in Germany. But I don't know about Americans are very parochial. We rarely look at what the clever things other people are doing outside that can make things work. But I'm just curious if you've seen any inspirations from beyond your shores.
Yeah, I was also interested in the bound group thing. I'm like, it just sort of seemed like unlikely to me. I'm like, how is this actually happening? It's like the amount
Yeah,
of coordination and the amount of like it just I sort of found it hard to believe when I first read about it. But it's true. I dug into it more, and like I think the key thing that people don't tell when they tell that story is there's quite a bit of like industrial policy going on from the state there,
okay.
where they're able to access financing at terms that like normal people, people in the U.S. aren't able to access because the government is basically supporting it.
So there's actually
So
preferential financing. There's preferential financing for this kind of housing there.
yeah, that's right. That's right. And yeah, I'm not a bad group expert. I don't actually know the specifics, but I think it's like, I think for that sort of thing to work, you'd probably need some sort of similar effort. So I'm not optimistic on that exact model translating. I think the question is like,
Right.
how do you get that something that looks like the end result through sort of like means that we are able to access in the U.S. Yeah, and so something actually I'm interested in, and Brig, I know you talk about this in your book a little bit. Is I think one thing that we sort of think of as like a structural structural and a problem in the U.S. that I actually sort of see as an opportunity in this space is that we do have this big wealth inequality in the U.S. Right? You have rich people, you have poor people, um, but in the U.S. it's like and we see this. Yeah, I live in the Bay Area, and it's like in a given friend group, there's like the friend that got rich off the AI IPO, and there's the friend that works at the nonprofit, and then and you have this like great wealth disparity within a friend group or within the family. And I
Yeah.
think it's obviously very extreme in the Bay Area, but I think you see this story elsewhere because we actually do a fair amount of income mobility. So even within the family, you'll see a lot of disparity. And so the question I'm sort of asking myself is like, how do we make use of the fact that within a social circle, some people have more means than other people, and actually can like the people with more means almost become like the patrons and the subsidizers of the lifestyles of the people they care about, and do we have
Right.
mechanisms for that to express itself? And so what we actually typically see in a lot of the projects we support is like there's the one person with more motivation and more financial means, and they're in essence cross subsidizing the people they care about. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's just like a risk cross subsidization. So it's like I'm gonna buy the thing and take it through the zoning process, and like things could go wrong, but I'm then gonna sell you the house at cost. After that, right? I might finance it for you myself. And so I think these like mixed income, mixed wealth setups, which I think inherently friend groups and families are just by
Right.
nature, um, do
That's
present a
interesting.
way to sort of do that. And I want to, and really that's just like a cultural question. It's like how do people see that as a thing that's okay to do? Is it on the menu for them to do that? Does it feel awkward for them to present that as a
Right.
possibility? And so actually something I'm going to try to work on over the next year is like that idea, and like framing that as not like a thing that you should be embarrassed about, but actually a thing that you're using your wealth to do a great service for the people you care about, and actually we should encourage this, and we should be actually
Uh, uh,
talk about this more.
but you've seen real life examples of this. Just people who are,
Yes.
yeah, it's a
Yep.
collective action problem, and they've got the resources to solve it. So they'll be the sort of lead actor.
And I think the most common place you see this all over the world, just like is multi generational extended family living. Which you see in like
Right.
basically every country but the US for the most part. And it's like it's like yeah, the grandfather with the wealth, like buys the compound and the family moves in, and it's like it's a very common setup.
So over time, what's the what's the most sort of favorable route for growth? Is it figuring out how to get people now, buying existing structures, or is it? And so you've got uh, so your role is as a kind of a platform for DIY group livers, right? Versus kind of corporate, you know, developments like Culdesac or developing neighborhoods that were built with it in mind that you're going to have some people living in proximity and have shared spaces, et cetera. So how does it, to what extent is do you see a role for kind of a more top down corporate, hey, let's provide this great product for you, and if we build it they will come, versus people figuring it out for themselves and you helping them?
Yeah. So on like a land level, I think every single family home on a reasonably large lot near a city is the opportunity. But I think what you'll see is probably a similar story to Airbnb, right? So like when Airbnb started, it was not what it is today. It was like a bunch of people basically sharing their homes and sleep on couches. And it was for a specific kind of person. And it was like the DIY mentality people were like the initial Airbnb customers. Um, Now Airbnb is essentially like, a bunch of corporate actors that are now providing Airbnb housing to people. And it feels more like a hotel in some ways.
Right.
And you just go on and buy it like you buy a hotel room. I think you'll see probably a similar story here, which is like, you know, you with any new social movement, with any new sort of product, you always have the like true, die to one believers who get it
Right.
going and become the people that look at as the aspiration for it. And then over time, the thing sort of, to scale, it needs the help of a lot of parties sort of in the wider ecosystem, who see an economic opportunity to scale it. And so my hope with Live Near Friends is like, we're gonna start with like this more battle grouping style DIY development stuff.
Right.
And but eventually I think it's gonna be, real estate developers who today are building subdivisions, tomorrow who will be building sort of Live Near Friends style housing. And
Okay.
people will buy it and rent it just like they do normal housing today.
For driving things forward, um, seems like this is something that when people hear that a real human being has done this, like it flips a switch in them, like it's gone, wow, that's a fantasy. Everybody's had this fantasy, right, since college, and you break up with all your friends and you scatter all over the country. You have this fantasy. Wouldn't it be nice to, stay connected? And here's somebody who's living the fantasy. So this existence proof, is a huge part
Crucial.
of spreading this, as in terms of like an actual social or cultural movement, right? So how much do you've got businesses, but you're also kind of a lifestyle evangelist, right? So you're trying to spread the good word about this new way of living. And I saw something very interesting that you did an update on Super Nuclear about your selling radish. And you were talking about how you've been doing these regular tours, and the tours attract, what it like 90% tourists and 10% prospective buyers. But there's a lot of people who just want to, wow, this is cool, right? This is a cool thing people are doing, and they want to know more about it. And so that seems like, and you kind of kicking yourself, man, we should have been doing tours from the get go to build, sort of raise consciousness about this. So how do you how do you spread the word? How do you get this seed planted in more people's minds?
Yeah. I think the existence proof is absolutely crucial. And it's like I think, and something I didn't mention is like, we didn't invent this idea of whole cloth. Like people have been living this way for a long time. I think and we were actually very inspired by another community that came before us called the Embassy. Um,
Okay.
and the thing that put it in our minds was going to dinner at the Embassy and being like, wow, this is what dinner at home could feel like. Like,
Okay.
wouldn't it be cool if we could have dinner at home like this?
Yeah.
And so I think it's right. So my hope at Radish is that like, for every, there's one radish, but hopefully there's 1,000 radishes that get created because of the existence proof and because the people that visit and see it's possible. And what we see actually at Radish is often people will, for the tours, will bring the less believing party with them. So
Yep.
like they'll bring their parent, they'll bring their spouse, and they'll be like, "See, look, I want you to look at this," and it's sort of like there's somebody trying to show it off to someone else. And so yeah, so my hope is like Leaving Your Friends as a company is never gonna like, have 100% market share in the space.
Right.
My hope is that like, we build a successful company, but really we're both a media company that like, gets the lifestyle out there, but also, for every one of these that we get to do, it inspires 10 more that we don't get to do.
Right.
And for me, that would be a huge success.
So tell me a little bit about the sociology of the people who are doing this already. So geographically, are they concentrated in particular parts of the country? Socioeconomic status, um, red versus blue. Is it all over the map? Yeah.
It is refreshingly all over the map. So I was looking at like our map of like where our users from all over the place. And there's not even a red versus blue thing. I thought that this would be like a blue thing. It is not a blue thing. And if like you think about it for a second, it's like there's red versions of this all over the place. It's like the way Mormons live, the way the way people form church groups, and I talked to
Yep.
people that like set up communities where everyone lives within 5 minutes of their church, and they have similar communities. So I think this is like something I like about this. This is like refreshingly non-political.
Yep.
And this is another reason I try to steer away from the whole like commune imagery is like that is like left-leaning imagery.
Right.
And I do not want that a part of this. I want this to feel sort of like, intentionally apolitical.
Um, and what's bringing people together? So, are is it just like so? Do you have people who really do have some kind of ideological or cultural intentionality, some particular way of life they want to pursue with others? Do you have any of that, like the classic kind of intentional community kind of people? Is it just normies who don't want to be atomized?
Yeah.
How much of it is extended family? Yeah.
It's surprisingly normie. It really is. And like I think the one characteristic I think that exists and everyone wants to do this is they're natural contributors. So like when they think about like why they want to live this way, I think the thing they have in their head is like I want to be a positive force on the people around me. And so like when we look at people who are going to move into Radish and we're trying to figure out if we want to live with them, I sort of have like a test, which is like we have dinner with them. At the end of the night, it's like, are they doing the dishes or not?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like that's usually like a leading indicator if they're gonna be like a kid, you remember? It's
Yeah.
I think it's people with like a contribution mindset. And you know, one of the lessons this has taught me is I think we don't actually ask enough of people in our civic society. Like we've all become such consumers of everything that like, we're not asked to put anything into it aside from our money usually. And I think like the way people really feel a part of something
Abashed to
is
ask. We're all abashed to ask. Even if somebody asks you, you say sure.
yes,
Right?
yes. So I grew up in like a family where like my family was always very scared to burden anyone with anything. And that was my
Right.
upbringing. Like, let's not burden anyone. Let's make sure. And I think what I've actually come to learn is like you are doing people a favor by burdening them. That is burdening someone is the way you connect with them. That's the way that
Yeah.
they get to feel a part of you and a part of the thing you're a part of. And so my wife and I call this Tom Sawyering, where we try
Yeah.
to like, when we have like a garden project or whatever, instead of going to do it ourselves, we call out to the people who we think like want to be closer to us and closer to our community. And we're like, how about you come and build a garden with us? And it sounds like they're doing us a favor, but we are doing them a favor. Because then they feel part of our community and our place. And I think like at a society level, I think we don't do enough of this, right? So it's like a micro lesson from our living situation, but like like the idea of service to anything, I think has just really been lost. And like I think if you look at like all these different forms of civic society that have gone away, there's a pretty big service element to it. There's a pretty big like contribution element to it. And the place where you really see this performing well, I think, is Burning Man.
Yeah.
Where like the reason Burning Man works, I think people right, it's really because it's like people are asked to contribute to it. Then that is like the main ask of
Right.
attendees. It's like you build it, you create this thing, and then you get to participate in it, and that's why people feel I think so moved by it and so part of it. So yeah,
So, and I was going to ask about how does this on the sociology question, how often is it that people are scratching their heads about trying to figure out how to make raising kids work, and thinking that being in proximity with family and friends would make that a lot easier. But you've told me interestingly, you've attract both sides. You have a specific attraction for people who are starting a family. It's obvious, right? It's you're sharing the costs of you're getting that village to raise the kid, and but then also the child free folks have a have a need, right? Because they've got a social part of their calendar they need to fill, right? So so you're attracting people from both sides of that.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, and I think it's like an underlying shared thing, which is like we need a support structure. That's who this appeals to. We need a support structure, and it's not necessarily we need a best friend. Like the people I live with are not necessarily my best friends. It's
Right.
like they're the people that are going to come and drive me to the hospital if I need to ride to the hospital. Like that's what local support structure does.
So yeah, and once you're living, next to people you like, just the spontaneous opportunities to do stuff together and help each other out just are up. They're just going to hit you in the face, right? But so in particular, I'm just curious about the nexus between people living with family and friends and the kind of trend towards homeschooling pods and micro
Oh yeah.
schools.
Yeah, yeah. It's not something I know a whole lot about. I think we're actually going to experiment a little more with this in our next chapter. I'm excited by it. I think the question is, and this is really just a placemaking question on the whole. And I think you know the people who are trying to build new cities and new towns now are asking the same thing, which is like, well, what is the basis of like a new proximal human community? Like, what's the centerpiece of it? And like, why should I move there instead of somewhere else? And the I think putting a school at the center of these things actually strikes me as a very strong way of getting something started from nothing. Um, and I would actually love to see communities like this with a micro school in the center. Um, and we haven't done work on this, but it's a very exciting opportunity to me. And for I think it gets to something that you know leveling up a bit, the themes you talk about in your book with just our stagnation. I think people talk about our inability to build housing, but I think our inability to actually build new cities, new towns, new
Right.
villages,
Yeah.
and not only our inability to do it, but our lack of desire to even try. And I've seen California Forever. I'm not sure if you're familiar with California Forever.
Yes. Yeah.
And when people try to do it, people actually get upset. They're incensed that somebody's trying to create a new place.
Right.
And it just strikes me that we are just capping our ability to evolve if we can't try a new city in the year 2026.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you about the connection between the co-living, for just to put it in one word, movement and this recent sort of experimentation with pop-up villages. You got this yearning for community. People are you can satisfy it sort of on the cheap with the pop-up village. You can get together for a month, right? So that's the huge ask of living permanently with other people is it's that's big. This is smaller, so it's less demanding. It's gives you less, uh, but there seems to be a nexus between some of these pop-up villages, and they're trying to start to create new communities. So I know there's the Edge City pop-up villages, and they've got a ongoing connection with this. Esmeralda is a kind of a new town, smaller scale and lower profile than California Forever. Seems to have run into less of a buzzsaw of hatred and opposition. But yeah, what's the have you run into that circle of folks and do you
Yeah,
see
absolutely.
a way in which your vibes intersect?
Absolutely. Actually, one of the founders of Edge City is here with me. The no, I think that's a super. Both of those are super cool experiments. So just to sort of describe them, so Ed City is a pop up village that various times in a year will sort of say we're all gonna go live in this town together, and people fly in from all over and spend a month together in a town. And so it
I
started to
went to
feel
one
very.
I went to one in Chiang Mai, Thailand.
Oh, great! You want to tell me how was your experience?
That was great. It was awesome. It was just yeah. I thought it was. I just came away really hopeful. It was around a bunch of smart people who were really interested in ideas and interested in connection. And it was like the weeks right before the 2024 election, and that didn't come up one time with anybody the whole time, which for a DC policy wonk was a great blessing. So yeah, I found it just a lot of energy, a lot of hopefulness, and it fired me up.
Yeah, no, it's a very cool experience. They're like they're basically trying to solve like an agglomeration problem. It's like, how do you create an attractor which gets a lot of people to a place? Which, if you're going to create a new place in the world, a new town, a new city, that is your core challenge. Basically, how do you turn the middle of nowhere into the middle of somewhere? And I think you bring up schools as like a way that this has been done in the past. Like college towns have been
Right.
ways of forming towns.
Yep.
Um, but I think if we're gonna create new places, we're gonna need new ideas of what can be an attractor. And I think the Edge City folks have done a wonderful job basically figuring out how to do this. Sort of using that brand of Edge City as just being like a flag that you plant in the ground and say, we're all coming here. And
Yep.
they've gotten that to work. Um,
Um, so I talked about your kind of need to play the role of evangelist is because you're, carving out a whole new sector of housing. Uh, but to what extent are your, customers uh, evangelizing on your behalf? So I
yeah.
would think once people are doing this thing and it's working for them, they're going to want to show off. So
Yeah.
so how much are these people like? Is it just all just 1,000 points of light, people doing their own things, or are they connecting with each other? Is there any kind of movement where people are trading tips with each other, or is there any kind of group consciousness about people who are living this new way of life and connecting with each other?
Yeah, yeah. A joke. It's like how do you know someone does CrossFit? It's like you don't need to. They'll tell you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think the same sort of applies here. It's like people that end up living this way just end up talking about it a lot. Because it becomes such a central part of how they live, and they just want to proselytize it because they just see everyone else not doing it, and they're like, like they need to know how easeful life can be. And so yeah, I think you do get this 1,000 points of life thing. In terms of connecting people, I think that's something that the blog I write with Jillian Morris tries to do. Super nuclear. So we sort of try to play host to the people running these experiments in different ways all around the world, and
You
allowing
do,
them to like publish stories.
yeah. You publicize them, and yeah,
Yeah. There's an interesting sort of union of like all the San Francisco co-living houses called the Hate Street Commons, where there's some coordination across the houses. I think most of the proselytizing is not house to house. It's really just like it's like the people that do it to all the people in their social world who don't do it. That's like the relevant sort of like, you know, I think communication point.
okay. My final question. Stephen Stills, back in the '70s, told us that if you can't be with the ones you love, love with the ones you're with. Um, uh, so I'm curious about the kind of penumbra of your movement or your new housing sector. If you've got people living with each other and kind of living more intensively and clearly sharing their lives with each other, to what extent do you see that possibly like encouraging just a revitalization of just good old fashioned American neighborhoods? And they were much more cohesive, convivial places once upon a time
Yeah.
than they are today. So, uh, how much running room do you think is just to restore community? Right now with the people who just happen to live next to you, uh, seeing the example of people who are choosing to live next to folks.
Yeah, yeah. I think each of these will become a neighborhood institution on its own, right? Right. And so it's like, because these things tend to be hosting spaces by nature. It's like you're creating a hosting space because you're hosting 4 households or 6 households. It's like that just naturally becomes a neighborhood hosting space as well. You have more events, you have more people over. And and I think like ultimately, like, I've always been curious, like, where did all these like neighborhood associations come from in the first place? How do they start? And like,
Yeah.
I've read the history of this. My suspicion is it probably started just as a couple of neighbors who knew each other and had some sort of feeling of joint purpose together. And maybe they just planted a tree to start with. Like, who knows? And so I'm hoping like each of these is sort of a proto neighborhood association, perhaps, um, in its own. And that's like one theory about how that could happen. But I if you have a bunch of people right now don't know their neighbors, right? There's just crazy this out there of like the number of people that even like met their neighbors. And I think this like idea that somehow that's just going to magically change and like people are just going to be encouraged to go out and meet their neighbors with no other prodding is just like sort of a fantasy.
Right. No,
And then
it's
actually
something for them. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
But
so like
if there's a compound or that's functioning basically as a kind of neighborhood, as a de facto neighborhood association and a community center, then that can get people out of their shells.
yeah, yeah. And it's not the only way. Like I hope you will discover. I'm sure you have ideas for other ways of that happening, but I think it's like one vector. That like if you have one of these in every neighborhood, a couple of them, like it's very plausible that they could actually, form something interesting.
So that's a exciting and alluring prospect that these little developments can be seeds of broader social revitalization. That's a nice thought. Phil Levin, wonderful to have you on the show. Great talking to you. Best of luck in all your endeavors.
Thanks, Frank. Great chatting.
Thanks for listening to the Permanent Problem Podcast. Check out my essays on the permanent problem over on Substack, as well as at the Niskanen Center website. And be sure to catch all our episodes on Substack, Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you love tuning in. Until next time, I'm Brink Lindsey, signing off.